You there?
We did get that email, but she sent out an email
Hi,
again
everyone.
saying tonight's webinar.
Sorry for the last minute joining.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go on mute then. Thank you.
Let me turn up. I need to put my headphones
Oh,
on.
there's Lucy. Hello.
Let's see if we've got everybody here. Aiden's here. I see Aiden. Yay, Aiden.
Hello.
Most important person tonight. You are our second to last guest for our little webinar series here. And
Try to finish strong.
Volume so I can hear everybody. All right. Aiden, can you say something so I can hear you?
The rain in Spain falls mainly in the plain.
That's awesome. That's great. Okay, got it. It's been a long day. How's everybody doing? How are you, Aiden?
Doing great. Heading off on my family's only vacation this year tomorrow. So it's that typical wrapping up everything that you mean to get wrapped up before you go away.
Yeah.
And telling yourself you'll work a little bit tomorrow to wrap those things. And maybe after that too. I'm trying not to do that. So
yeah. Are you going anywhere fun? Or are you going camping or what are you doing?
New York City for 4 days with the kids.
Oh, fun. How old are your kids?
6 and 2, both boys.
Oh,
and the 2-year-old's never been. The 6-year-old's been 30 times because we go for medical stuff, but the 2-year-old's never been. So it should be a nightmare on the plane. And then I think after that, we're flying down to my in-laws' place by the beach in North Carolina. So I hope to fully be unplugged and unburned. Yeah.
Okay. We'll have a good trip.
Thank you.
Thanks for spending one of your last hours with us. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Let me give you a little bit of an introduction to our class and what we're doing. We are recording right now, and I will edit this a little bit so it doesn't look so discombobulated. But this is a class of about 10 students who are graduate students at National Louis University, which is a local university here that really specializes in teacher education, I think. Mm-hmm. And I graduated from this program about, 10, 15 years ago. I can't even remember. And I did some adjunct work for them a while ago, and now just started teaching online with them. Mm-hmm. And my students are really. This class is about. It's about learning, digital tools learning and assessment. I had to think about it for a second, and we've been covering a huge range of stuff all year or all summer. And the point of this is to of these guest speaking spots is to kind of bring the practicing world of ed tech into our virtual classroom. And I was inspired by this last summer when I got to visit a friend at Harvard who was a teaching assistant and for Chris Dede, who's a professor there, and they invited me to a lecture where the head of a Chinese video gaming company was giving a talk, and the name of the company is called NetDragon. And I thought, this is, I wasn't wildly impressed by anything necessarily at Harvard. I mean, I was there for a day and whatever. But the real value from going someplace like that is that they have all these connections and they have all these opportunities of people coming by and lending their expertise to their students because of their name and their location probably too. And I thought, why can't we do that sort of thing for students in other places who aren't necessarily, going to Harvard. And so I've tried to really leverage my network to bring in people who would be of interest to everyone. And this also kind of goes, in our discussions this week, we've been talking a little bit about networking. And I think it's really important for teachers to kind of get comfortable with that concept because traditionally we've been really isolated in our classrooms and not gotten out and seen the world. So this is an opportunity to kind of start building that professional learning network if they haven't already, and take advantage of what's out there. So to my students, Aiden is the co-founder of Bitsbox, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that in a little bit. But I've known Aiden for about 10 years now, a little bit over that maybe. Yeah. And Aiden, did you see that New York Times article about Google and education? It was a huge, huge spread, 2-page thing, maybe a month or so ago.
I did.
Yeah. And there was no mention of like early Google in education.
No, I felt nostalgic and not bitter, but I was like, wow, we were there at the beginning. Like I remember pushing for the stuff at Google and meeting a lot of resistance. So it was really it's nice to know that those ideas carried forward, even if we weren't, integral to their carrying.
Yeah. So here's the story, everybody. I think it was 2006, and Google had just bought Writely, which became Google Docs.
Mhm.
And I think one of the guys who's big with Google Apps now is Jonathan Rochelle, and I think Jonathan Rochelle worked for Writely, but haven't met him yet. But one of the Googlers, a Googler, came to Chicago doing a focus group for teachers on how Google could help education. And they also did this in San Francisco and in New York. And Aiden, were you working for Google at the time, or were you still, okay. So
yeah, Google bought Writely at the same time that they bought the startup I was working for. So.
And that's SketchUp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was going to bring my copy, I'm looking in my shelves right now, of SketchUp for Dummies, which you authored. I have it in my shelf somewhere. I'll have to find it. But anyway, yeah, so Aiden was working for Google on the SketchUp end of things. Kristen, the woman who was running these focus groups, was in marketing somewhere, but there was no education initiatives at all, really, at Google. If they did, they were very disparate. And so they did these 3 focus groups, and some work came out of it with 2 things kind of came out of it. A partnership with Q, which is the ISTE affiliate in California, and which in the Google Teacher Academy. And Q ended up running the Google Teacher Academy for a while, and then they also did a blog called the Infinite Thinking Machine for a while. So I blogged for that. So there were a bunch of us that were kind of early on, and I helped with the Google Teacher Academies. I helped with 4 or 5 of them. One of them in Boulder, which you were at, I believe.
I did the one in Boulder. I was in Chicago and LA, I think, and maybe New York.
Okay. Somebody said they met you at the Boulder one, I thought. I was mentioning you to somebody who works for Tinker. So yeah, you might have been there. But so now it's kind of this behemoth of a program. It was 4 people running everything for about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years maybe. And now it's probably a couple hundred people, I would think. It's
and Kristen's
machine.
Kristen, the same woman who kind of started it, she's head of global education marketing for Google still.
She's actually stepping down.
Is she?
And she's going to be running some computer science program. I just heard from her a couple weeks ago. She's pregnant again.
Oh, good.
And she's it's a computer science university program or something that she's going to take and run because she'd rather have a small team. But
That's wonderful. Actually, I've got to reach back out to her.
So she's
pregnant again. I know she wanted that.
Yeah. So I think everything's okay in that department. So yeah, it's been kind of fun to be on the ground and see everything, come around. But it's been really great to get to know Aiden a little bit again after many years of not seeing him, because he has this really exciting startup. So I'm going to stop here and let him tell you about Bitsbox. And if you want to show us anything, Aiden, if you want to give us a tour of the website or anything, you just click on the share screen down there.
Sure.
And I'll stop talking and let you tell your story, because they've heard enough from me and probably want to hear from you. And to my students, if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the chat. I know that you guys have a lot of questions afterwards, so if you can think of them during, that would be great, and we'll get to them before the end of the session. So thanks for joining us.
How long would you like me to go just before I sort of stop for questions?
I'm thinking maybe 20, 30 minutes at the most. I mean, you don't have to, go overboard with this, and then I think we can have a leisurely chat that way and make sure that we get you out of here by the top of the next hour.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thanks, Aiden.
Let me see if I can screen share. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so we'll just go to my desktop. Now, does everybody see the Bitsbox website up on the screen right now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, my name's Aiden Chopra, and I am the co-founder and I guess chief creative officer. It's very exciting. When you co-found a company, you get to be the chief of something. That's a benefit of making a startup that never really occurred to me before I did it. But I was a little modest when we did this, and I just called myself the creative director. And then I got chided by an investor once who said, if you put that on your card, people won't know that you're a founder. They won't, actually people respect C-level people, and so you should do it. You won't be bragging. And so I reluctantly took that. But anyway, I get to be C-level for the first time in my life because I made my own company. So there. My background is actually not in coding. My mom's a teacher and my dad's an architect, and I went to school because I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, but then I failed calculus. But in so doing, I ended up drawing the calculus teacher every day before I would fall asleep on the paper, and then he would sort of tug it out from under my head. And at the end of the semester, I went to beg for a passing grade. I said, I promise I'm just going to deal with animals and biology. I won't do any calculus at all. And he said, I can't. You're terrible at this. I can't pass you, but you should do art school. And I said, no. I'm not an artist. I'm a scientist. And he said, well, you could be the worst scientist, or you could be the most scientific artist. So it's kind of your choice. And it was probably one of the kindest, things an educator had ever really done for me. He didn't push it over. He didn't let me talk him into it. I ended up finishing up that degree. I passed calc the next time I did it. But I went to art school after that. I kind of knew I wanted to go and do a graduate degree in architecture afterwards, but I decided to take a different path. Studied jewelry and metalsmithing and photography and graphic design and illustration, lots and lots of different disciplines within fine arts and craft and design. Did that degree, finished, didn't have a job, moved to Vancouver, worked for a mining company where one of my responsibilities was photoshopping trees back into aerial mine photographs. To make them look better to environmentalists. Is everybody still there?
Yeah, we're just all muted so that we don't laugh while you're trying to talk.
So,
that's amazing.
Like the thing you're going to burn in hell for. But I moved to Vancouver because I was a woman I was dating there. It was really good. But anyway, I did that for a bit and then got into grad school down at Rice in Houston and was lucky enough to get a pretty generous scholarship. Did 4 years at Rice. And the whole time, I focused on, my thesis was designing elementary schools. I was focused on making things for kids. My thesis was about studying the way that playgrounds are made and the way that play and learning theorists have looked at the way that play influences learning and back and forth and said, how could we design schools that are more inspired by playgrounds than by prisons? And that was my whole focus. I was really always more interested in designing things for kids than designing any particular thing for kids. Regardless, when I finished that degree, I was scooped up by SketchUp, which was a little startup that did 3D modeling for architects and engineers back in 2004. And I went to join that program to run the education program, so sort of sales and marketing for teachers and students in schools. And really quickly took it from a revenue generating thing to a marketing function, saying we shouldn't be trying to make money off of teachers and students. Not only is it evil, but it's short-sighted. With software is like drugs. You should be giving it away so that when the students come out of school, they will use your software. That's the right way to think about this. So I need a budget. I don't need to be providing you with money. And they bought it, which was nice. And I did that for a couple of years. I ended up writing our newsletter and being the kind of outside voice as the founder of that company faded away as he got richer and less interested in that project. They needed people to sort of step in and take over the voice stuff. And I did. We were acquired by Google in 2006. And a couple months after the acquisition, I got this email from Wiley Publishing, who published the Dummies books. And it said, Mr. Chopra, we're looking for someone to write a title called SketchUp for Dummies. And we feel that your voice is appropriate for the Dummies brand, which was sort of a mixed blessing. I don't know, it's like an insult or not an insult, who knows? But I was really excited because I got to write this book. So Google was amazing and they let me take 4 months. They paid me and I got to go and do nothing but write this book. And so I came back as the evangelist for this product and realized that what I really love is teaching technology to non-technology people. So people who want to learn it but have no background in it. So if I have a skill at all, and I learned this over the 10 years that I worked at SketchUp, it's in being able to have sort of one foot in the beginner camp where somebody's interested but knows nothing. And one foot in the, I'm an expert on this and I know a lot about it, but I have empathy for the people who don't know anything about it. And if there's anything that's going to be needed as we move into this brave new world of robots and technology and all that stuff, I think it's going to be people who understand what it's like to not understand the technology, because it's going to constantly evolve. And I'm 41 now, and it's already sort of passing me by. The computers, we might be able to program them to explain themselves to older people, but I don't think so. I think we're always going to need people who can explain things to the rest of the world. So that's kind of what I do. A few years ago, a guy I worked with at SketchUp came to me and said, hey, I'm going to quit. I'm going to start this company that teaches coding to kids, and I want you to quit. And we're going to both go and co-found this thing. And he was honestly one of the smartest, like most efficient, best developers I knew. And I'd sort of fantasized about quitting and making a startup with him. And so I thought about it for like 3 minutes, and I was like, yes, I'm in. And then I went and told my wife, and then it sort of, we took like 2 months to be brave enough to make the decision. And that was the summer of 2014. And then we spent the whole summer. I got really lucky, first of all. My wife is the product manager at SketchUp and earns a good living. And she's the entire reason I had the luxury of being able to quit my job and like do a startup. So, no illusions there. But Scott and I spent the whole summer in my house just kind of prototyping and talking, and like we'd get bored and we'd go fly a kite in the park next to my house. We'd eat like Italian food every day. It was just lovely. It was like you could do a musical montage to the summer of love and production. It was wonderful. And then we did a startup accelerator here in Boulder called Boomtown, where we realized that we're product people, and we had a very, very clear vision for exactly what this thing could be. But we didn't know our ass from business. We didn't know anything. Like people would say, how much is it going to cost? And we'd be like, I don't know. And they'd be like, well, how are people going to find out about it? We'd be like, well, good things get found. And well, how are you going to distribute it? None of those things, they're hard questions, but we would sort of just gloss over them with but look at these awesome features. And so what the Startup Accelerator did for us was help us think hard about a business model. We realized that the hard part about teaching coding is actually the repetition. It's not hard to get kids excited about doing this like once or even twice. What's really hard is getting them to come back and do it over and over and over again, because learning to code is, despite what everyone will tell you, it's hard. It's really hard. It's scary for most people. It's not like a human language. It's this weird combination of mathematical logic and straight problem-solving logic, and then there's a linguistic aspect to it, but mostly it takes practice and exposure and time. And we realized the way to get kids doing that was to basically not ship them all the stuff at once, but to sort of give them a little bit, just a project on some regular schedule, and kind of get them interested that way. And when we realized that was the model, we thought, well, let's do a magazine or something. But for some reason, we'd chosen the name Bitsbox already. So a mentor of ours said, great, why is it Bitsbox? And we said, well, like there's Dropbox and there's Box, and it's this great metaphor for technology. He interrupted and he said, that's stupid. You should do a box. You should just put the magazine in like a toy in the box, and then you can charge people $40 a month instead of $5 a month. You put a $5 magazine in a box and it's $40 a month. Ta-da. And this is why you go to these accelerators, because people who think that way, you might think whatever you think of them, but it's sort of brilliant. And you're like, well, if we're going to get this off the ground, we're going to kind of need to get this to people who are willing to pay us $40 for a month for a product that's never been tested or anything. So that's what we did. And that's kind of how Bitsbox was born. So it's a little cynical, a little evil, but to be honest, that's kind of how we got it off the ground. We knew that we will eventually be in schools with this, but we decided really early on to go directly to consumers with Bitsbox, because you can sell them much more quickly. You can find out if it works much more quickly, and you can kind of scale very quickly if you can. With schools, it's definitely the better place to reach a lot of kids, but it takes forever for them to test it and to try it over and over again to give you feedback. And then if you're trying to make any revenue from it, it's just like a 5-year cycle. It's really miserable. So we thought consumers and then schools, and that's kind of the product track that we're on. We've had some successes. We launched with a Kickstarter, and we raised, I think we had a $40,000 goal, and we raised $250,000 because Kickstarter really liked it. That was about 2.5 years ago. And then we sort of trundled along for a while, and got lucky. We applied for Shark Tank and went through that whole miserable process of whoring yourself out on video and then in person, and being effusive and like talking like a crazy person and getting used to the idea of reality TV and celebrity billionaires. We ended up taping the thing about a year ago, and it aired in February of this year and had exactly the intended effect. We didn't take a deal on the show. We were offered something that was terrible. It's a long story. You can watch the segment if you want. I've only half watched it once. I can't bear to see myself on television, but our business tripled. We went from like 2,000 people to 7,000 people paying us every month for a subscription. We have, there's a map behind me somewhere that shows we have customers in 74 countries now, and everything's sort of going gangbusters. But the way the Bitsbox actually works is you can see that there are these boxes. Lucy, just nod if you can see my website scrolling. Okay, cool. So the idea is that every month, when you sign up, we send you a new box of stuff. And these projects start at the same place for every new subscriber. So in your first month, you get Animal House, which is actually teaching you coordinates and simple commands. In your second month, you get RoboBoogie, which focuses on variables and what we call action commands. And then every month, you get more and more materials. We give you a sexy, colorful binder that we call an Apper Keeper. Ha ha ha. If you're a child of the 80s like I was, you remember what Trapper Keepers were. And we're a couple of old people who run this thing, so forget it. We called it an Apper Keeper. And you put the cards that you get. I'll show you what the cards look like. We go down here. This is all marketing stuff, marketing stuff. Here's a preview of a bunch of the cards. You can see birthday card. If I click on this on the homepage, you can see there's some code there. So what happens is you actually go to our website. I'm going to show you how this works, but here's the code. We think of these activity cards or these projects kind of like movie posters or like video game covers. The first job of this card is to get a kid excited about like making the thing. They're not going to get excited about a handout or about some like really modern sort of staid minimalist graphic design. We tested that. Adults love it and kids are like couldn't be more bored by it. So I had to completely reset how I do graphic design and said, okay, well, what if I just use all the effing colors? And what if I use all my fonts and then I put more fonts and more colors and apply like decent graphic design sensibilities to making something that where the only really common element is this app number and a little logo down here. But otherwise, it's just an absolute dog's breakfast. And it, for whatever reason, works with kids. So we have things like birthday card where they code their own birthday card and can send it to somebody. Doggleheads teaches coordinates, but lets them put a funny like dog head on another body. You can mix and match the species of heads and bodies, but it's even more fun when you start putting presidents and world leaders' heads on here. Wild Wedding is our political sort of social statement into marriage equality. In this case, a bear is marrying a tiger, and we don't know if it's arranged or not, but essentially that's what's happening here. You can see that the code is broken into these little blocks. So they type in one block and then they run it and they type in the next block. Every card has a little challenge, one or two on it. So we actually get them to change the code in some way. We don't tell them specifically how, but they have to understand something about how the code works to sort of meet the challenge. Oddball Airport lets them launch a rocket, a helicopter, and a balloon into the air. Flight of the Dragon is awesome. You fly through the forest and click to like turn the dragon. He burns up the forests. Frog Prince Donkey teaches them if statements by clicking one side of the screen, turns your prince or your frog into a prince, but the other side turns him into a donkey. He goes ee-aw and kisses you. Mars Needs Milk, you can suck cows up into a spaceship. Bernie the Artbot, you like draw with laser, the smoke kind of comes out of the cursor. Fireworks is awesome because you're blowing things up. Reluctantly Obedient Parakeet. This is a challenge. So we don't give you the code, we show you what the app should look like. And we give you the assets, and then we write the description of what it should do and give you a hint as to what you should look at. But for the more advanced kids, this is the way they kind of move beyond the stuff that we serve up for them. There's I'm Covered in Bees and Cookie Snitch, which is kind of ripping off Harry Potter a little bit, and Car Wash Time, where you're smashing into bugs. But basically, there's literally hundreds of these activities that we make.
Who comes up with these ideas? I mean, is it you and your partner, or do you have somebody who's specifically kind of coming up with the crazy thing?
Will you think less of me if it's me? How should I say
that?
No. So at the very beginning, Scott and I and a third person on our team named Anastasia Miliano, who started as sort of an intern with us and is now our COO. She's a mechanical engineer from Dartmouth who's just one of these crazy, hardworking, super smart, jack-of-all-trade people. Also, like me, learning to code by teaching people to code. Everybody says the best way to learn is to teach, and that's absolutely what we're doing. Now the product team consists of me and Anastasia. So we sit down and we plan out, I don't know if you can see, I guess you're still looking at my screen, but on the whiteboards in front of me, I can see our planning process, we basically say, okay, so for instance, for month 12, which we're starting on now, we're teaching data structures, so advanced arrays and something called a hash. And our theme is dinosaurs, of course. And so we sort of take those two things and we say, we want to make a 15-line app that uses dinosaurs in some way, but we need to get across this notion of a hash. And so in this case, you're sort of creating a guess, like a flashcard app where you look at the dinosaurs and you have to guess whether it's a herbivore or carnivore. That's sort of the premise. That's what we're doing. And then I do, because we're a small company, I do almost all the writing and all the graphic design. And Anastasia and I kind of collaborate on the code. She writes more of the code. I do more of the other writing, but it's basically sort of a two-person effort right now.
It's really well done. Another student just asked, what ages are you gearing this towards? It's 6 to 14. Am I right?
It's 6 to 14, yeah. And that the reason that's such a broad range, I mean, who knows? Like, we're idiots for putting first graders and eighth graders and everybody in between in one bucket. The biggest reason for that is that we're a very small team. We really can't make many different variations on the product right now. The answer, which is sort of unsatisfying, is a 6-year-old will choose 1 or 2 apps a month to do in general. My son's 6, that's what he does. And they engage with it at sort of one level, a pretty basic level. A 14-year-old will generally jump in and do a bunch of stuff. The coding sandbox itself is completely open. You can build anything you want. You can spend as much time as you want in it. So that's sort of our answer for the age range. I think eventually we'll have 2 or 3 different product lines that are more focused on specific little age ranges within that.
Yeah, and another student is asking about standards, and here's my take on standards, and then I'm curious about yours. I feel like if you're teaching somewhat decently in general and kind of aware of what kids should be doing, that it's not hard to hit the standards. And so this, here, I mean, this is not really meant to be this is not meant to be a content oriented. This is about coding. This is not about content. So it's not going to be necessarily geared to English language arts or math standard. Well, maybe math somehow. But it'd be, I think more likely any standards it would align with would be the Computer Science Teacher Association standards. So Aiden, have you guys looked at those or talked about standards at all as you think about getting into schools?
We've talked about it, but I think we've come to the conclusion that it's not the first place we need to be. The nice thing is that you look at standards and they're certainly not curriculum. You guys all know more about this than I do, but my understanding is that they're actually fairly broad and they're, demonstrate familiarity with blah, blah, blah. And from the time I've looked at math standards, I mean, the nice thing is that when you're coding, you're hitting math standard after math standard, right? Like demonstrate the idea that numbers get bigger and demonstrate blah, 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 that sort of thing. We actually have a school chain in Brazil that's using Bitsbox specifically because it's typed and they like the fact that kids are learning English at the same time that they're learning coding. The kids that are in their program are there to learn English and coding, which is kind of interesting. We hear from teachers all the time who say that they feel like the typed coding helps with the literacy aspect of what they're trying to teach in a way that the block-based coding sort of doesn't. But I'm not an expert in that, so I'm just kind of repeating what they're saying. As far as computer science or the CSTA, the Computer Science Technology Association standards, they're very broad. I think they were just revised. There are different companies who are focused on schools, all kind of making their own variations on that. So it's a really open, kind of unsettled pool of standards right now. We know that we adhere to some of them. We're not worried about making that first. I think because of our background and because of our focus on consumers right now, our product approach is to make something that we can demonstrate kids will use and that is fun. And then we're going to figure out if there are tweaks we need to make to adhere to particular standards in a particular order. But
I think that's the right way.
It wasn't in our DNA to start with the standards and then try and make a product that met them. If that makes sense.
I think that's the problem with education. We try to force everything into those standards, instead of designing well from the first place, whatever the topic is. And so, in independent schools, you don't see them getting all. You see some really creative teaching going on, some really rigorous teaching going on, and they're paying zero attention to any kind of standards. So I think standards are a guideline and not something that should be hard and fast adhered to. So anyway, good question though.
Cool.
So Mia is asking, just to clarify, students have to type out the written code. This is not a block-based one. Yes, correct.
Let's do it. Let's jump in. Should we just do some Bitsbox? Because that's by far more fun than watching me talk. Okay, so I can go Kids Sign In up here on the home page. And I'm at this /code page, and you can see this little necklace of cards we designed. If I go Get Started, so this is interesting, right? Like, one of the core tenets of teaching kids stuff is to make them believe that they are building something real. Kids we've found are actually much more excited about making something they perceive to be real and not just like some practice sandbox. It's not doing exercises. You're really making something. So you don't do projects in Bitsbox, you build apps. And you build apps not only that will work on your computer, but they'll actually also work on your real tablet and they'll work on your real phone. And we extend that metaphor to like a literal virtual tablet that sits here on the screen. So when a kid goes to use Bitsbox, their account looks like a tablet, just like this. And we're going to say, I'm here for the first time, so let's go. We pop up some little instructional stuff. This is your new tablet, hooray. And we go to make your first app. So this is a little getting started tutorial that we start everybody out with. And you can see what's going on. So this is Food Fight. We're saying type this. So I just have to type in exactly what I see. We'll go open parentheses. This is, for many kids, the first time they've ever typed a parenthesis. It's just kind of neat. Or an apostrophe, which we call a tick in coding. And I'll go run. And now the screen turns red. So what's really happening behind the scenes here is we are teaching JavaScript. This is a series of little commands we made that run inside of JavaScript. But one of the real pain points to teaching coding is that normally you have to install all this software on your computer just so that you can start coding and running it and stuff. So one of the things we do, and other people do this too, is to allow you to do it right in your browser. That makes it really, really easy to get started. You're in our kind of little safe sandbox and it works well. So now we say, now change the red to your favorite color like Phil Tan. Does anybody know why we chose tan? Any guesses?
I'm going to guess kids don't like tan, so they'll pick their own color.
That's exactly it. We chose the color that is no one's favorite color.
Beige.
So, I mean, if you want people, yeah, exactly. Like, yay, eggshell or something. In this case, I don't type here. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say, I want this to be, I don't know, yellow is one of my favorite colors. So we'll go like this. Now, it's funny because kids will, depending on how old they are and how like tech savvy they are, they'll just spend like 20 minutes here, honestly. They'll be like, brown. And they'll be like, oh, brown, that's awesome. And then they'll like, immediately it goes to poop brown. Oh, poop brown we don't have, which is just fine. But most kids will also try something like rainbow. We learned after a while that we should probably have a rainbow thing in there. So once they get sick of trying different colors and things, they go on to the next step. They'll go P equals stamp, open paren, PIE. Now let's say I forget a tick and I kind of do that. The idea is that we don't fix it for you. We do everything we can to sort of show you, to sort of help yourself. So in this case, the official error message is unclosed string. Kids don't know what a string is at this point. So we show you what the code should look like. And educators tell us all the time they get really excited about this because it kind of forces kids to look carefully and work stepwise and solve their own problems. And we think that's a benefit. So I'll go here. Now I've got a pie on the screen. The next line of code is p.tap equals explode, like this. And we'll run this app. It says now click the pie. I'm going to blow that up. Excellent. I'm going to run the app again. I can click the pie again. So most kids, of course, Mia, do you want to volunteer something else we should blow up?
My guess is school.
School. You know what? We actually, let's see.
That doesn't pop up.
So we have a school, but we've gotten complaints from educators. I'm surprised that's still in there.
Yeah, I don't like that idea at all, but I know, recollecting reading Calvin and Hobbes comics, that's what children idealize, but in our current state of affairs of the world, I would not ever condone that or recommend that. It's just thinking from the mind of a child, my guess is.
I mean, in all the kids I've observed, I haven't seen them try school. I've heard about it anecdotally, but usually they'll try other things. I don't know.
Yeah, what do they actually try then most commonly? I'm curious.
They try poop. We had to add
Woo!
poop. So we add poop and we can blow that up. And then you're like, oh, wait, I could make it, instead of maybe exploding, I could make it dance. The nice thing about an open system like this is kids, depending on their interest level and their realization that they can do different things with this, will actually spend a lot of time in here. And we absolutely want them to experiment. That's the whole point of this system. It's like, go in, change it, make your own thing. That's success for us. In a group setting, so individual kids, not so much at home, but in a group, there will always be 1 in 20 kids who starts just clicking on everything. And they'll decide that they can open this library of assets. If I go and look at the stamps, for instance, I've got all these stamps and there's just thousands of these things. So they're like, oh, what can I blow up? I'm going to blow up bear. And then they'll go in here and they'll say, I want that to be green. And now I've got a green bear on there and I can make him dance, that sort of thing. So it's pretty open-ended, and you can get lost in a vortex of unproductivity here if you're not careful, but it's kind of intentional. And then we go back here and we say, if you want to make a new app, that's kind of the end of the tutorial-based stuff. We go here, and assuming you have some sort of a card or a little booklet or something, we go here. Now, the apps themselves that we have, I'm going to shift over to Acrobat. Let's see. So everybody see Animal House on my screen here? So Animal House is the first set of cards, and you'll see that we have How to Bits box here. Mini apps, there's 3 or 2 line apps right here on this card, and you can see this is actually the PDF version of this, so we just make it printable on a letter size sheet of paper. Lots of educators get this, or they get the cards, or they get something else. And the idea is that kids just start typing the code. So we can go back over here to mini apps, and let's type snacks, please. Actually, let's do hot stuff because it's pretty short. So hot stuff is app number 3429. I'm just going to type in 3429. It preloads the name of the app and the little icon up in here. And then all I have to do is type in exactly what I see. In this case, I guess I could just copy paste it. Ha ha ha. Let's hope kids don't do that. But you get the picture. We'll go like that. And if I tap it, oh, he burns. That's pretty cool. And the song should be heavy. There's lots of sounds and things like that in the system as well. You hear this like super annoying music. Really good reason to mute all the speakers in your classroom before you make everybody do this. Oops, gonna mute that. Okay, cool. And so the nice thing about calling this Monster 23 is, of course, what's the first thing a kid realizes when they see Monster 23?
That there are 22 other monsters?
That there's at least 23 monsters. So, gosh, I'm going to go look at the other ones. So they go Monster 22, and you'll probably usually go like, oh, it's adorable. And then you'll sort of get 21. And they start realizing that they can sort of change things. So the first way the kids honestly interact with Bitsbox is they just start changing what are called strings. Anything that turns magenta that's within these ticks here refers to an asset that we have in the library, and they can kind of change things. So their first interaction with it is in modification. But very, very quickly, they go into authoring on their own. So we can go in here and say, I want to make my own app. And I can say, I want to stamp, in my case, I'm going to stamp my name on the screen or my own head. I'm going to use some parameters to make that even bigger. So let's kind of do this. I'm up there, and I can say tap equals explode. I'm going to make my own head explode, and this is the sort of thing we're doing. So this is box 1. Box 2 is RoboBoogie that focuses on things like variables. The one that we just finished, just wrapped yesterday, actually, is, oh, actually, this is Foul Play, is not the one we just wrapped. So this is the one we shipped this month. It's chicken themed because we're getting tired of this. And we thought chickens are as good as anything, honestly. And what we were teaching was kind of advanced logic, if else logic here. Is that what we were teaching? Yeah, I think so.
So,
and so this app calculates animal years. You type a little app that there's a lookup table. Oops, sorry, I think you're muted, Lucy. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I'm probably muted again. Anyway,
I can hear you.
okay. So my question, and somebody alluded to it before, is the difference. You had mentioned this before when I talked to you at ISTE, I think, about the difference between block-based coding and coding in real code, and what the philosophy was with you and your partner in deciding to go that route as opposed to block-based. Can you go into that for a second? Because I think that would be really interesting to my students.
Yeah, you bet. So I think, what people understand is that the genesis of block-based coding came about 10, 15 years ago with the thought that there are basically two parts to learning to code. There's what we call the syntax, meaning the actual words, right? In this case, it says function, drag, magnet, move, x, y, 100. That's sort of that part of the language, which maps roughly to, the words and the spelling in a human language. And then there's the logic part, like, oh, if I want to make something happen when I drag on the screen, I need to use a drag function. Or if I want something to happen 50 times, I need to use a repeat function, which calls the hat function 50 times in that case, right? So that's not so much the syntax as the logical construction of the app. Does that make sense? That's coding. And they said, gosh, if we could disambiguate the logic from the syntax, if we could make it so that kids didn't have to type and potentially screw up because they're having to remember if that's a comma or a tick or parentheses or a semicolon or something like that, if we could take that away and abstract it somehow, let's say visually, then we could just teach the logic part, which we think is the most important part of coding anyway. Makes total sense, and it's completely valid, absolutely valid. And so in this case, Scratch from MIT was kind of the pioneer on that front. And then a number of other visual coding languages kind of came in that emulated Scratch. So there's everything from super commercial stuff like Tinker with a Y out of California, to code.org's learning to code systems that kind of made their own stuff at the beginning and now are using Blockly, which was developed by Google. It's all really, these are all sort of the love children of Scratch from MIT. And before that, things like Alice from CMU and stuff like that. But they're all kind of flavors of the same notion, which is that typing is hard. It's an obstacle to learning to code for kids. We should take it away for a while and see if we can just get them doing the logic part. And the thing is that it works. But what nobody's really figured out how to do is to bridge them from the visual coding to the actual text-based coding. It's a real problem. Right now, tools like Tinker will show you the equivalent JavaScript off to the side of the blocks that you're doing, but they won't necessarily teach you the JavaScript that makes any sense. Or you can teach raw JavaScript. It's just hard. Like, the point is that raw programming languages are really hard to learn because syntax is incredibly dense and difficult. The easy syntax lets you do things like type your name into the thing, and then the computer program will tell you how many letters are in your name. Or you give me a city and I'll return a sentence that uses that city, like, what's your favorite city? Houston. I love Houston. Super fun, right? Actually not that fun. Like, kids really want to make stuff that's visual, and block-based programming, it lets you make games and visual and puzzles and cards and things that do sexy stuff, right? They animate, they talk to you, they flip around, they do neat stuff. The problem is that if you're trying to teach a coding language, like a real coding language like JavaScript or Python or C++ or Ruby or whatever, the syntax really is an impediment to doing those things. So what we did in Bitsbox is we said, okay, everybody's doing the block-based thing. That's cool. Like, everybody's doing it, and that's great. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's this real coding that kids who want to do this are eventually going to have to be able to graduate to. But it's sort of like starting with Dick and Jane books, or like with Elmer the Elephant books, and then graduating them directly to Ulysses. It's too big a leap. So Scott, my co-founder's innovation was to say, what if we create a little library of commands that make it really easy to do sexy visual stuff with typed code, so that instead of typing 4 lines of code to make the magnet drag around, in this case, it's a little sexy. I know this isn't the best app to be dwelling on forever and ever. We thought this was hilarious, so this is what we have. Basically, you drag the magnet around the screen and you pick up the chicks, but if you move too fast, the chicks all run away. Ha ha ha. Anyway, let's move to a different one. This one's more like a shell game. So it's a 3-card Monty with chicks and chickens.
There's a chicken theme going here. I know.
Yeah, it's a chicken. It's all. This is chickens. So it's
So,
chicken. It's a chicken box.
I like
Yeah.
chickens. I'm partial to
Yeah.
chicken. So you also said to me that Scott taught himself to code as a
I
kid,
did, yeah.
and that was a big influence in understanding this progression and how it should go in terms of properly learning this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, the irony in this decision 10 to 15 years ago that kids shouldn't learn with real code, that they should learn with blocks, was that there's an entire generation of programmers, right? The people at Facebook and Google who are working there now, none of them learned to code with blocks. So you've got this teaching methodology that says the best way to teach is by using blocks, but you've got this evidence that says actually millions of people learn to code a different way. And the way that they learned was by having examples of code that just kind of existed on paper. In this case, the book that came with the computer in the early 80s, or Byte magazine, or whatever examples of code you could kind of get your hands on in the 80s. You would type in the code if you wanted to make your computer do something. If it was buggy, you had to figure out how to fix it. And eventually you were kind of typing your own code. So there was this amazing precedent for this methodology. The problem was that nobody was doing it anymore. So we just decided that this is the way we were going to do it. So if you want to start this way, you totally can. You don't have to start with blocks. Plenty of people start with Bitsbox. For kids who've done blocks for a while and are ready to kind of move on to typed stuff, we're a really great bridge for that. But Bitsbox was born of Scott's desire to teach his daughter, who was 7 at the time, to code the way he learned to code when he was 7, interestingly. So he coded this whole thing up while we were still at SketchUp, just to sort of see if it would work, and she loved it.
Was she the
And that's
kid
kind of
in your demo?
idea.
Was she the kid in your demo on
In Shark Tank?
on Shark Tank? Who was that
No.
kid who did the demo on Shark Tank?
It's phenomenal. So that kid's name is Grace. And
She was unbelievable.
we found out about Grace because Grace sent us a video. So her mom, it's a really interesting story. So her mom is a former kindergarten teacher in California and homeschools her kids. Decided that she wasn't interested in local schools or whatever, decided to homeschool her girls. And they don't have a ton of money. I mean, money is certainly not something that they're rolling in. Decided that she was going to spend all of the money that they would spend on Grace on educational stuff. So when she saw our Kickstarter, she backed it. She was one of the very first people to get Bitsbox. And then all of a sudden we get this video from this 10-year-old girl named Grace. I think she was 9 at the time. And she's this wonderful actress with this huge personality. She's hilarious. She was doing impressions of her mother and telling us about how much she loved Bitsbox. We found we were going to, and we kind of communicated with her a couple times because she's amazing. And then we found out we were going to be on Shark Tank, and we thought about using Audrey, Scott's daughter. But it was kind of during school time, like the first couple weeks of school, and they were uncomfortable flying her to LA for a whole week outside of school. So we said, well, who do we know in LA? And we thought, well, gosh, Grace is in LA. I wonder if Grace could do this. And so I kind of tentatively wrote her mother and said, hey, she's going to have to get this ship or get like a Coogan account for child actors. And I'm so sorry. And we can't compensate you. We're a startup. But if she's at all interested in being on like a national television show. And they wrote back and they're like, Grace has been acting in commercials for 3 years. I told her that if she wanted anything, she had to make her own money. And we're in LA. So she decided to become an actress. So she has a Coogan account and she has a reel, like a portfolio of commercials. And I thought, oh, these are going to be like local car dealership commercials and stuff. She's been in McDonald's commercials, but she's Hispanic and she speaks Spanish in all the acting that she's done. So I thought she was bilingual. No, it turns out she's not bilingual. She just memorized all the Spanish well enough to sound like a total native Spanish speaker, even though her parents are from Mexico.
Interesting. Oh my gosh.
Totally comfortable on camera and legitimately wants to be a prosthetic limb programmer working with robotics. She's sort of teaching herself C++ and she's phenomenal. Just a great kid. So we totally worked out.
Okay. I thought she was unbelievable. That demo was out of this world. If you guys haven't, I put the link into the Shark Tank episode in the chat if anybody wants to look at it. I want to ask a question for, I don't need to read these out loud, but I'm going to do it. Unless Doug, do you want to ask your question, Doug, or do you want me to do it?
No, I can do it.
Okay.
Hey, Aiden, I just was wondering, is there a way, or might it be kind of on the books for like a next step for students who might want to, how to put it, like write some code, write a program that demonstrates their learning of content from whatever they're studying in school?
Like, can they make programs that map inside to the other things that they're studying? Like if they're studying
Yes.
the French Revolution, or they're studying intervals or something like that?
Yep, like these are cool places to start, but they're packaged, if I'm understanding it right.
Mm-hmm.
How can they take what they're learning from here, but then actually applying it, to create a program about the French Revolution, or what it's like to be piggy on the island, or something like that.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, I know what it's like to be piggy on the island. Spent most of my adolescent life as piggy on the island, unfortunately. So I think the short answer is it's completely open, and there's like literally thousands of assets. So kids can't load their own pictures, backgrounds, or other things, but they can absolutely write their own text, and they can draw their own pictures if they want. So that's actually one of the major things we hear from teachers all the time, that they're really interested in integrating this with, if they're not teaching coding for its own sake, and sort of, saying they're going to do computer science or computational thinking, if they're just trying to get some coding into their curriculum while they're teaching other things, that's absolutely how they do it. And the cool thing about Bitsbox, I mean, this isn't a sales pitch, but many people are teaching coding by using really gamified, scaffolded sort of tutorial systems, right? Like, beat this level. Yeah, you learned this. Now beat this level. Yeah, you learned this. And you've got all the bananas, and now you're like a master coder or something. And that's legitimate, but it doesn't allow for the kind of thing that you're talking about. The neat thing about Bitsbox is it's literally just a JavaScript coding environment. So I can code anything I want. The way that we provide you with the resources to do that is we have all these examples, and we have these tip trick cards. So if I scroll through here, this is, for instance, how do I drag the stamp I'm touching around the screen? Or how do I make one stamp eat a whole bunch of other stamps? In this case, we can sort of look at the equivalent cards in month 2. How do I make a stamp look like it's being sucked into a black hole? How do I make a stamp move? How do I make a stamp a random size? So we see what we're making is kind of example based, if that makes any sense. We can't really tell you exactly step by step how to make the thing that is just for you, but we can provide hundreds and hundreds of examples that if you kind of know what you're looking for, you can go and look for something that does something and be inspired by that code, which is incidentally exactly how professional coders work too.
And then,
does that kind of answer your
Yeah,
question?
no, that's perfect. I guess I must have missed something crucial before when you were blowing things up.
Sorry.
But that's perfect. Great, thanks.
Cool.
the experimental mindset, kids have that. Like, they'll figure it out. Like, you give them a few guidelines or places to look, and they'll figure it out. Something happens between, as people grow up, though, where they lose that. And I just worked with some teachers that had never really done a lot with technology, and it's hard. I mean, people get kind of frozen as they get older with it. But I wonder if kids are taught to think more flexibly and to be creative with a few with a few commands here, that down the road that they'll think a little bit more critically in general.
That's our hope.
Yeah.
I think what's disappointing is that it's not 100% of kids who are into this. This isn't, I think what the dream is that you come up with a system that appeals to every kid, right? Whether he or she is into STEM, into math and science, or into logic puzzles, or, maybe it's the kid who just lives for soccer, or it's the kid who lives for violin or something, and it could care less about this stuff. And what we really want to do is get to a point where we can engage that kid no matter where they are. I don't think we're there yet. I think we probably are making something absolutely for all the little Aidens and all the little Scotts, all the little people who are inclined to do coding anyway. And if we're lucky, we sort of scoop up another 10% of the kids that weren't engaged by the tell me your name and I'll tell you how many letters there were. But I don't think it's really at the point yet. And then, the gamified stuff where it's more like a video game than it is like a teaching system obviously engages more kids. I think we're really skeptical of how much they're actually learning because they're not actually able to make their own things. And that's where we believe the real interesting stuff happens. Somewhere in between the heavily gamified stuff and our completely open-ended make whatever you want system is the answer. And we don't know exactly where that is yet.
This goes along with constructivism. This is totally about, that learning theory. That's what you're espousing here. Michelle,
Good to know.
oh yeah, if you want a label for it, you can throw that around.
It's called conservatism. That's what it's called.
Constructivism, yeah, and you should
constructivism. Okay.
Yeah, and you should look at Seymour Papert's stuff too, because I think that ties into this quite a bit. I'm not an expert by any means, but I think this is the kind of computing, like I don't know if anybody in my class is familiar with Gary Stager. Gary is worked with Seymour Papert. He does a lot of makerspace stuff. He's very outspoken, but he's also spot on about education and how things have kind of gone awry. And I think he might be interested in this. I mean, he's about teaching kids to code with real code and that sort of thing. So if you're interested in somebody who's kind of a purist about this type of stuff, he's a good person to follow. Just a couple questions while I've got them here, and then you can keep going. Tori wanted to know, does everybody get the boxes in the same order? Or if you have a kid that has some experience with coding, can they choose a different box to start with?
Everybody gets the boxes in the same order. If you want, you can write us and say, no, we want to start with box 4. Unfortunately, we don't do a very good job of telling you what's in every box yet. So
Okay.
they just literally don't have a web page where we show what we're teaching in each box. We absolutely will. And I think our dream is that there are some kids who literally burn through this stuff in a weekend and they'd be ready for their next box a week later. Other kids don't get through one of these boxes for 3 months and they need a much slower pace. Our system doesn't allow us to sort of send people things in just in time, but it's something we're definitely working on. So going beyond what you're saying, Tori, to the really key would be sending kids stuff exactly when they need it, exactly what's going to interest them, exactly when.
It's like it reminds me of Stitch Fix, which is where I get some of my clothes. And it's mail. I kind of tell them my preferences. They put something together. They send it to me in a box, and I can hold off from month to month if I don't want something, or whatever. But I think this whole it's interesting to me how these startups or the food ones that send you the meals in a box, like how all this customized stuff is available to anyone anywhere now.
And I think these are really interesting. As like people have been talking about this as a model for learning that's completely computer-based. I always forget the word for this, but adaptive learning systems, right? So where you're basically showing the kid exactly the right thing next, right? You gauge where they are. If they haven't got it, you show them another problem. If they've got it, then you move on to the next thing or something. And that's fine. I think that there's an analog version of that too, where we can take advantage of the fact that kids love getting stuff in the mail and are automatically more engaged by physical stuff than they are by actually doing the analog, U.S. Postal Service version of that, sending them 3 cards saying, which did you build? Awesome. Which want next? Letting them pick it and then custom printing it and sending it directly overnight to them or first class mail so that they got their next project right away and they can kind of work on that.
That seems a little more authentic and adaptive to me. I mean, I think the way where EdTech is going right now is creating products that are about just delivering curriculum in different ways, and that adaptive model is one way, and it takes away kind of the human element away from everything too. So I don't find it particularly. It's like giving digital worksheets to kids at the right level. It doesn't seem anything special to me, but maybe I'm missing something in there.
What we want to do in classrooms is we want to give our idea for a classroom kit for this is to essentially give a teacher an enormous box of cards. Like here's 100 projects and here's an index that shows where they could be, and then giving them some sort of a resource that lets them give the right next project to the kid. Even if they're not necessarily a domain expert, like, oh, she did and this one, you should try this one next. It doesn't seem
Yes.
impossible to do, and seems like a really nice kind of in-between version of that. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, it's all right. One thing that you and I have discussed a little bit, and that I think would be a good way to end. And Scott's going to be calling in. I have to call Scott. He's going to be in his car for the next part of this. So I have to figure out some way to bring him in here. But the question, I think a good way to wrap up would be, what are you hoping to do now that you're kind of, you're in the consumer market, and I know that you're thinking about schools and what they need. What are you thinking about as you move ahead? Is there anything that we can give you feedback on in terms of what schools might, Michelle was asking earlier, I think she had to leave. Is this going to be available for schools? What's the plan?
Yeah, well, ironically, so the plan is, what's keeping us from moving fully into schools is having a product that includes the layer of sort of educational stuff that I think most mainstream teachers, or even most teachers, sort of require, right? You need some lesson plans, you need professional development in most cases, you need some notion that this adheres to standards in some way so you can justify it to people. That it's not really a different product, it's kind of an overlay on that product. And that's kind of the teachery stuff. There's a technology layer which probably includes some sort of dashboard where you can actually track kids' progress. You can see what they're working on. You might be able to comment or share it with parents or something, right? There's a technology stack that needs to be made. What's preventing us from doing that stuff isn't interest. We would love to do that stuff, but we're an 8-person team and none of us is an educational specialist. We have a really successful business right now based on making things for consumers. And so the economic necessities of keeping a startup alive are that, when you think about that next person you're going to hire, you go, we could hire this person who's going to help us work on this education product, but we're not willing to sort of gouge teachers and schools for this yet, which means it's going to be an infinitely small part of our revenue for the sort of foreseeable future. Whereas if we hire this other person that works on the consumer product, essentially our existing product, we can kind of make this much of a difference. And we're not profitable, and we're not, we're not like fat cat capitalists going, we're going to do this because it's going to make us $1 billion, and that's just going to suck, right? The notion of being a startup is that you are always going out of business. Like runway runway means how much money do I have that represents time before my business closes up, and I either have to become profitable or raise more money before my runway goes away. Runway is a great metaphor because if you're on a plane and you get to the end of the runway and you haven't taken off yet, you explode. To go back to exploding.
So, back to exploding.
So, I mean, the interesting thing is that most companies like ours who focus on schools first, their business models are very different. They raise a ton of money from investors, and they get NSF grants and other, they go after nonprofit grants. They spend an enormous amount of their time measuring the efficacy of the things they've made to be able to kind of justify those revenue streams. And they know that the revenue is years out in schools. It's hard. It's really hard. Yeah. We have this amazing benefit, which is that we're making really good money from, to be really honest, parents of children with means. And as much as we really, really, really want to do education, we just can't justify it right now. We can't justify growing the team to sort of do it the right way, which doesn't mean we're never going to do it. We're absolutely going to do it.
It's just a matter of time and funding so that you can do it right and sustain yourself. And I think part of the problem is, I think there are a lot of businesses in ed tech that are really struggling with that business model. And the ones in particular that started out being completely free and not really they thought they would figure out the business model as they went. I think it's landed some of them in trouble. So I'd much rather pay for something that's high quality and have it stick around than see it struggle, I guess.
So the caveat is we actually do have classroom kits. If you go on our website, you can buy 10 packs of 12 cards, each of the first 3, and we're going to be having more this fall, along with what we call a teacher's guide, which is an expanded version of our grown-up guide. It's a total half measure. It doesn't include any of those things I was talking about. Yeah. But if you want to use Bitsbox in your classroom, you can get 120 cards and a teacher's guide for $100, which we feel like is a pretty it's a pretty fair price. Most teachers can pay for that out of their budgets.
And I think you can adapt this for the classroom. without a lot of fanfare. I think it would be, if I was working at a school and had a budget, it would be great to have every kid have an account and be able to experiment and play with this.
That's the idea.
Yeah. And then they go home and do it. So that's great. Okay. Scott Trailer is
Karen
here.
was
So
listening?
I want to make sure that we let you go too, because you're going on vacation as well.
I am.
There you are again. I'm sorry, your window. There you go.
Even-
So if you have any students, if you have any other questions for Aiden, I'll give you his contact information and you can email him. And my students, that works. I like that. The pen and paper
Very high
way.
tech.
Imagine
Aiden
that.
Aiden at bitsbox.com. It's super hard. Yeah.
And I'll let you know what everybody says in their reflections that they're going to.
Great.
Oh, that works really well. They're going to write some reflections about this webinar, and they always have really good conversations amongst themselves about what they've learned during these webinars. So I think you might be interested in hearing what they have to say too. So I'll share that with you probably next week, but you'll still be on vacation then. So and I'll
I'd love
send you
that.
the recording
That's wonderful.
as well. Okay.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this, Aiden. This is awesome. You're hilarious, and your design skills are like out of this world. I had no idea that you had the background that you did. So I learned a lot today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you later. Have a good vacation. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Okay. And now we have Scott coming up. We've got the double duo here of coding and programming. And I'm going to pull up Scott's slides. And Scott is driving in the car, and hopefully he won't run off the road. Hi, Scott. How are you? He's there. I know he's there somewhere. I think he's muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. How are
There we
you?
go. I'm well, and yourself, Lucy?
Good. And you're not in the car.
No, I actually made it to in some place in between my next meeting, so I figured I'll just take advantage of it when I can.
Thank you so much for coming. And I'm sure you're running around with your head cut off as usual. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about Wonder Workshop and your new role there. And
Thank you for asking.
yeah, we're thrilled to have you here. So everyone, this is Scott Trailer, who I met at Google, another Google connection 10 years ago, 11 years ago.
A long time ago, I think.
Yeah, they had, and I don't know if I ever told you this story. Aiden, the guy before you, he was at a focus group. He worked for SketchUp. He was at a focus group in 2006 that I was at in Chicago, and I didn't tell this whole story before, but the woman that was running it, that I was in contact with before we went to Google, and it was my first time ever in a Google office, and you could write on the walls, and they had candy all over and massage chairs and all this. And I met the woman who was pulling us all together, and I said, "So, do you work for Google?" And she goes, "No, I'm just helping out my daughter." And I'm like, "Who is her daughter?" And I Googled her last name. It was Esther Rojicki, and her daughter, Google started in her daughter's garage. And the other daughter had been, the other daughter was, at the time, was married to Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google. She's a teacher still in Palo Alto, an amazing journalism teacher and kind of a force of nature. So that's how my involvement started, was in this focus group with her and a bunch of people. And at that event that we were at, which was called,
I think it was Breakthrough Learning.
Yeah, she was
with,
there.
The Cooney Center and Google, and I don't know if there were other sponsors, but to that point, when we were there, I think this was you, I was asked to do some reporting for the Cooney Center, and Michael Levine said, "Hey, could you interview Marissa Mayer," who at the time I did not know who it was. And I got like all of 4 minutes with her. And
a deep voice like this.
Yeah, and right before I interviewed her, she was on stage presenting to the group, and I remember during her closing, she said, "We are at the doorstep of a sensory revolution," and I was like, "Whoa, we are, right?" And I thought I looked at you, and you looked over, and you're like, "What? Oh my God, did we just have our minds blown, or what?" You know?
I don't remember that, but I remember sitting with you and like seeing like Grover. Maybe Grover stuck in my mind more than Marissa Mayer.
Yeah.
But I do remember also, so Kristen Fridella, who ran that whole event, and she was really advocating for education to get more attention at Google. It was a really hard sell there for a long time. And she
Yeah.
took the Google Teacher Academy program to every department she worked in as part of her 20% time. And this was a huge deal. That conference was a huge deal. And
Yeah.
she had Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO at the time, talk to everyone. And afterwards, he said to her something like, "Oh, I'm so glad we did it. It's about time that we got more involved with education," or "It's about time we something."
Yeah.
And that was probably the, you know, the beginnings of Google really understanding that they had a role to play in education.
Yeah, I think it was at that same meeting, there was an outdoor, I can't remember if it was Eric or Sergey that was speaking outdoors to welcome us, and how he talked about the powerful Montessori experience he had
That was
growing up.
Sergey.
Yeah, and Warren Buckleitner, who is a software reviewer and journalist, had recorded that and shows it an awful lot on his YouTube channel. But I thought that was the beginning of, yes, Montessori is getting some visibility. And then, within the same year, Will Wright from Maxis and EA came out and said, "Yep, I'm a Montessori kid too." And it's like, yes, for Montessori.
So his mother-in-law set him up to say that because he had been a Montessori kid, but she kind of coached him ahead of time
Nice.
to like, and the other thing I remember about that is he had those web shoes. I mean, this has nothing to do with education, but he had those weird webbed running shoes, and I'd never seen them before. And I think I spent the whole time staring at his feet.
Did I don't know if you watched the Silicon Valley series on HBO, but like in the opening show or two, there's the CEO of the evil empire wearing those shoes,
Oh,
which
really?
is a huge joke, yeah.
So you're now in the heart of Silicon Valley. Speaking
I am.
of that,
I
so
am.
I'm going to transition here, and let me tell you first a little bit about my awesome students. They're all graduate students at a local university here. They're all really savvy and smart, and have been having great conversations in our discussion forums about a variety of topics. And I've sought to bring in speakers to kind of give them some other, expose them to different voices and experts in the field. And this is a class that's focused on digital tools, learning, and assessment, which is really broad. So it's basically, whatever I want to make out of it. And I think we've covered a lot of territory. So, and we've started talking about maker spaces a little bit, and coding and some of those things after talking about kind of instructional tools. So I think you'll be of particular interest here because of your background in children's media, which is a little bit different than ed tech. And then now your transition from that world into the world of Wonder Workshop and that sort of thing. So that's where we're coming from, and we're really excited to hear your story. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me. It may be worth sharing. While I have a strong consumer products in technology for children background, but I was an educator for over a decade and had worked on many large-scale learning products for classroom use. I always felt it important to develop educational materials that kids wanted to use, that they were excited to use. And I always thought some of the teachings on the consumer space would be helpful in the engagement in classroom product. At the same time, that's a very fine line to walk, meeting educational goals and the needs of teachers, time on task, which oftentimes many informal learning products that end up in the classroom aren't very good at any of that. But anyway, so it's not just like children's media. My heart is in education. It always has been. And I think part of the reason why I'm at Wonder Workshop is that I have that blend of consumer and classroom that I think is a really good balance for their product currently.
So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get started with 360 Kids and that sort of thing? And then how did you end up with Wonder Workshop?
Well, I started a software company in Boston a very long time ago, where when I got started, it was the promise of using interactivity to deliver messages. And in the early days of starting my business, right before I started a company called 360 Kid, the only people who could really afford to do interactive experiences were large corporations I had worked for a big telco, Bose, Verizon, and non-educational publishers that were experimenting in this new medium of interactivity and multimedia. But I found it was a fun platform or experience to engage younger users with. And much of the personal projects I worked on were kind of whimsical. They had appealed to children. They weren't specifically educational, but my goal is to kind of entertain children. So in those early days, I remember, let me see, Prentice Hall, before Pearson had acquired them, I was doing a lot of interactive textbook work with them, and then later traditional just ebook work, and it was interesting. All my educational publishing clients didn't quite know what to do with me because I was doing work on the side for like Hasbro and Mattel and Disney, and they thought that was the glitzy work I wanted to do. And then what was funny is whenever I'd be in a meeting with Hasbro, Disney, or Mattel, or anybody like that, they're like, "Oh, well, you're an educator. You can't understand what it means to be a consumer product developer." And I go like, "Well, actually, yeah, I do." And there are very few companies, I think, that get that balance well. Certainly Sesame Workshop comes to mind. But also I had a very long-term working relationship with Leapfrog. And that was, really the perfect fit for bringing entertainment value to informal learning, with a really high engagement and high learning outcome successes, I thought. So that's a long way of saying that. I love both industries, but specifically for child engagement.
I think it's good to know both. I mean, I think that's the best of both worlds, right? I mean, it's not one or the other. And if you run into people like the people that you said, well, you must not know this side because you haven't worked on this side. I think that's smart.
There's a Marshall McLuhan quote. Oh, and I usually have it right at my fingertips. Oh my gosh, guess what I do? McLuhan.
Did you also, out of curiosity, did you work on, there was a really great global portal that PBS did with some characters, and about the time that we did the Google thing. Was that you? Did you work on that? It was so great.
I worked on a bunch of things for PBS. I didn't work on, their teacher portals or Ready to Learn, but I did work on their Cart Kingdom. I was an advisor because I was also doing a lot of virtual world advising, and I was doing a lot of data gathering and analysis in that industry for others.
Okay.
But had done a lot of like learning game one-offs for PBS over the years.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was neat. I mean, there was some, there were some really fun things to work on. Like working with Sesame was awesome. Working with Leapfrog was awesome. Believe it or not, the best client experience I ever had from a software perspective was working for Pokemon. And not in the way you would think about it. They engaged me to build a learning product for 3rd to 5th graders to teach math, science, language arts, and good citizenship skills. And it was an amazing 4-year run, and the product did really well. It had some great research data to back up the learning outcomes. And it was a very naive request where the CEO of Pokemon Japan said, in Japan they use Pokemon characters for adult learning. The CEO said, well, why don't we do it in a children's product and teach children? And why don't we do it in America? And, that sort of thing doesn't happen.
Yeah.
If it did, there'd be a lot more successful Disney educational products, you could argue. But, and the wonderful thing about working with them, I mean, there's such a strong work ethic in Japan. And we would work all day long on making these interactive experiences that would teach fractions, for example. And the way, when you're developing product, it usually you build something, you hand it over, they have 2 weeks to give you notes back to make changes, and then the cycle continues in 2-week chunks. But not with a Japanese vendor. You deliver something at 6 p.m. Eastern time, and they get it at the start of their business day in Japan. They work on it all day long, get you notes. So when you're back in the office the next morning, you have a long list of things to change.
Wow.
And we got in this cycle of iteration that was really fantastic. And that's why I say, like, working with them was just unbelievable.
So what's your skill set? I mean, are you a programmer by trade? I mean,
I was,
Yeah.
I think in the early years, I think, my degrees are in design. I have
Okay.
degrees in graphic design, industrial design, photography. And as my college career is winding down, computers were really taking off, and I was scared of being left behind. That being a designer was not enough. Visually communicating required something else. And so I took as many computer classes, as many programming classes as I could. I did not graduate with a computer science degree, but I did ultimately one day teach computer science. And it was probably the best decision I made in my career, because things were moving so fast in technology to get involved at the right time in learning how to code. Much of it was self-taught. I took a lot of classes,
Yeah.
I think Northeastern, BU in the Boston area, and then just started my own company.
It's so interesting because I put you and Aiden together for these 2 hours, not really on purpose. It was kind of a scheduling thing. And his background is totally in design, and he went to architecture school and taught himself to code and that sort of thing along the way. And so it's very interesting. You guys have very similar backgrounds.
I think, I think there's something about a design education that really not just makes you think harder about what you're doing and what you're saying visually and how you're trying to engage others, but I think it's also, when I think about instructional design and things that I hate about it that are not really strong for child engagement, I think, you can oftentimes find solutions in design. Now, granted, they may not be pedagogically sound, but at least it's a fresh way of looking at trying to deliver learning content.
Cool. All right. So tell us now, so how did you make this transition from your own company to Wonder Workshop, and then maybe you can tell us about what Wonder Workshop does for those who are unindoctrinated.
Yep. So let me see. I've been in the industry a long time. I've seen the rise and fall of a lot of different industries, CD-ROM days to the web days to the app days. And the hardest transition after a couple of years was the app economy. That I was a service-based developer. I was not making my own products at the time, though we had IP that we sometimes licensed out. And one of the things I kind of learned 2-3 years into the app world for kids and for education is you have to be a really great app to make a terrible living. That the economics just don't work. I remember a woman from Apple, Mary Beth Janes, grabbed me aside at Toy Fair one time. Do you know Mary Beth? And she's wonderful. And I haven't been in touch with her for probably a year now, but I know she's back in the Valley. Anyway, I remember
she saved me in an airport with my daughter, who was 6 at the time. So this is 12 years ago. After ISTE, or it was NEC then, and there was a terrible storm. She was flying to Chicago on the same plane, and she had lots of fun games on her computer, which she got out for my daughter, which I guess I didn't have fun stuff on my computer. But she saved me. So that's how I met her. Yeah, I haven't seen her in a long time.
Well, she introduced me to the app world before it was formally announced. They were trying to find developers to make product, to have enough product in the app store when they launched. And I remember her telling me about what the new device is going to be and how wonderful it's going to be. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. This sounds really revolutionary. And then she said, and we're going to sell everything for 99 cents. I'm like, well, wait a minute. If you know about the metrics of how you get subscriptions to work or how you did CD-ROM sales, it's like the lowest possible number that you would start with to be sustainable was 40,000 users. So when you do 40,000 users on 99 cents and then realize 30% of that's going to Apple, that's your development cost. And things that our company did for about 25,000 were really somewhat skimpy on the engagement factor and content factor. So I remember telling Mary Beth Janes, it's like, you need to sell this stuff for 10 times more. That's not sustainable. Developers can't keep up with that. Well, I mean, what does one developer's voice mean in this equation? Really nothing. And So, we developed apps for years, but it was really hard, really hard to break even on anything you made. So I don't see another disruption in the kid tech, ed tech space that is sustainable right now. I know people say VR. I do not think that's the answer.
I don't either.
AR maybe, but I haven't seen anything to really convince me yet. So I made the decision that it was time for change, and I was going to move away from 360 Kid and look for something else. I had done a lot of interesting things in the meantime. I had moved out to Silicon Valley with nothing that was going to take care of that, and I was an advisor for the kids startup group at Lumosity. They had Lumi Kids for a while, and that was fun until the FTC report came out saying, no, there's really no claim there. There's no empirical evidence to say what you're saying. And then after that, I volunteered pro bono at CoLab, the Zynga EdTech place, for a number of months. And I knew they were looking for an executive director, so I thought it was a perfect timing. Sadly, Zynga shut that down. But in my travels, I met a lot of great people, and Mike Lorian is a big figure in ed tech, starting at Apple and being at Common Sense Media. And I noticed on LinkedIn he had updated his profile to say he's a VP of Education at Wonder Workshop. And we hadn't been in touch a long time. And I wrote him and I said, hey, Mike, you may not remember me, but I review a lot of product. I'm part of a lot of award shows and nominating Best of Breed. And I just want to say, Wonder Workshop makes some amazing products. Congratulations. I think you found an excellent place to work. And within a couple of weeks, he wrote back to me and said, thanks for your note. Maybe you'd like to meet. Maybe you'd like to come work here. And so, the serendipity of it all. It was really great. And, I had met Vikas Gupta, the co-founder and current, the CEO of the company, a number of years back, and was very impressed with what they did with their robots, Dash and Dot. These little blue guys that we could probably show you in a moment in a slide or two. I think it's kind of funny how these stories end up, that you meet people, years ago, and you run into them again, and before you know it, there's new connections and new opportunities. And I've been in this industry a long time, and that's one thing I really underappreciate about the industry. The opportunity to just create something new from someone that you met a decade ago.
We've been talking a lot about networking, and I think when schools are not great networking, it's hard to network when you're in a school. You're siloed, and really have your head down working in a school, and your community is the school.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's hard for teachers to get out and see what's going on, or it just simply doesn't occur to them. I mean, I don't think it would have occurred to me when I taught in Chicago Public Schools that I could have a life outside of that building. And that was like 1990 to 1998. So it was a long time ago. But because of social media and Ed Camp and things like that, changed for teachers quite a bit. And I think, so I think one of the lessons I've tried to kind of instill or show is that your career may be going different trajectories because of being open to opportunities. And I simply your call this or your email thanking or noting that this guy had the dream job or whatever. And you never know what's going to happen. So I think it's important in whatever industry you're in because you never know where it's going to take you.
No, true. And while just referencing back how you mentioned how we first met. That's how we met in the real world at Google, but we had been connected on Twitter for like a couple of years before then, just reading, what you would post in the ed tech space. But at the same time, you probably know, and if your students don't know, getting out to conferences, and what usually happens is you can't afford the price of a ticket, but if you can figure out something to talk about for 45 minutes, you'll get into the event for free and you'll meet a ton of people that you'll never meet otherwise. Yeah. And I did that, for years. And the benefit I think that I had was I didn't do it just in education circles, that I did it in book publishing circles. I did it in toy circles. and met a variety of different people who were all passionate about one thing, is, you know, doing right by the child. And I think it's created some really interesting opportunities for me by spreading it out kind of that way.
And the other synergy that we have too is that, you know, David Kleeman.
Oh yeah,
and David's wife taught with me.
that's right.
A long time ago, and unfortunately,
Yeah.
she passed away.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think if it was before or after she died.
It was before, because I do
met him.
remember. You know, I think I had only known David for a couple of years before you, and I don't know if your students know David. He's an international expert in children's television. I mean,
Yeah.
he's world renowned, and quite a prolific writer.
Very smart guy.
And now he's working for a virtual world company in London called Dubbit. But David is. I love David, and I love, like, I'll send him a draft of something I'm writing just to see, is it, you know, am I full of it, or am I on to something? And then he'll let me know something he sees in the tech space and say, like, you think kids are going to like this? What do you know, what's your take on it? But I remember he had mentioned, I think he was going to meet some folks in Chicago, and he was based in Chicago at the time.
Yes.
And I had told him, I said, hey, I've met this person on Twitter named Lucy Gray. I wonder, you might. He's like, well, surprise, I'm going to go meet her.
Isn't that funny?
It's like, it was really, you know,
Yeah.
very, very funny, small
And
world.
I had no idea that Leslie's husband did this kind of work until.
Oh, and I didn't know she was a teacher then either.
Yeah. And I think I had left Lab, but I was still working at University of Chicago in another capacity. So yeah, so it all comes around.
It all does. It's all connected in one way or another.
Yeah. So, okay. So tell us about Wonder Workshop, because I honestly don't know a ton about it. I've never played with Dash and Dot, which is kind of pathetic. And
Gotcha. Well, Dash and Dot is their first product as a company. And maybe how could I show the slide of them?
I can put them up, or if you want to, you just click on share screen, the green button in the middle. And then
okay, there we are.
And then you can pick for where you want to show it.
Let me call up the slides here.
I do have your PDF if we need to use it.
Okay. Yeah, I got it here. I just have all this stuff. Let's see here. Is that showing? Oh, look at that. It shows every single window I have open.
And then you click, and then no, we can't see them yet. And then click the one that you want to show. And now we see them. And if you put it into there, that's good. If you put it into, click on the green button in the left-hand corner, and it'll be full screen, I think. In your upper left-hand corner.
I think it might be that one. Okay. Oops. Green button. That one right here.
Yeah, it usually makes it full screen.
How's that?
Perfect. Awesome.
All righty. And let me share. I've been at Wonder Workshop now just a little less than 6 months. I've had a few speaking opportunities for the company. Usually I'm a lot better without deck, but I have a deck here. But so just so you know, you can interrupt me at any time.
Okay.
And if your students have questions, I'm not fully I'll
translate. I
mean,
okay. They can type them, and then they can type it here in the chat, and then I'll tell you, or at the end they can grab the mic and chat with you. Whatever you want to do.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Let's see here. Company overview. Wonder Workshop is interested in at least in some of its early iterations of its mission, is help children become great digital citizens and learn how to code. And at the time when the company started, it was late 2012, early 2013, where the co-founders had this idea of making a robot that would help teach programming skills. And it took some time for them to develop prototypes and concepts. They landed some initial seed funding. They had a Kickstarter campaign that raised a little over $1 million to go to market to build the Dash and Dot robots. And you can see these little characters. I wish I had a closer view of them, but Dash is a robot that has wheels and can move, and Dot is stationary, but both of them are filled with many sensors. This is our executive team here. Let me go back to this for a second. And if I imagine your students are familiar with Scratch, the coding language out of MIT that Mitch Resnick had largely been behind in building or designing and thinking. And our robots initially were programmable with a Scratch-like app that we call Blockly. It's block-based coding, and all kinds of different things with it, you know, from moving your robot around or to change its lights or to make different sounds, to record sounds and play them, you know, however you within a program. Anyway, this was the beginning of one of a number of different apps that we released, and Dash and Dot is now a couple years old, 2.5 years old in the marketplace, and Wonder Workshop has publicly closed, I think it's 34 million in a Series B, you know, through seed funding and Series A and so forth. So they've done well, they're doing well, and some of the stuff that I'll show you in this deck are from 2016. We're currently working on a product, some of which I can talk about, some of which I can't, for this coming holiday season.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So you guys started in the consumer market and now have gone to schools,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
That's what we were talking about in our previous session with Aiden. Was they've done the same thing. They haven't gotten into schools quite yet, but that's
Yep.
the thinking.
So what's kind of funny is the slide coming up. I mean, Vikas, the CEO and co-founder of the company, was always looking for something neat to do, something important, something that would have the benefit of impacting children's lives in a positive way. And one time on vacation with his family, when he was trying to figure out what he would do next, and a very successful entrepreneur in his own right, had come up with the idea of, well, maybe we could build products to help children learn how to code. And you know, that's what Dash and Dot are today, and a lot of the products that we've developed so far. This is a photo of Vikas and his daughter on his backpack there, out on vacation hiking. You'll have to forgive me. I'm still new enough to not remember all the details of this influential moment for Vikas and thinking about what his next chapter was going to be. But it did lead to a Wonder Workshop, which initially was called Play Eye, and then they changed their name to Wonder Workshop. And at the time, what was interesting, you know, when he thought of starting Wonder Workshop, Code.org, I don't believe was in existence yet. Coding in the classroom was not a thing. But shortly after they started, you know, you learned that kids could code at a very early age. You know, there's a quote here, researchers at Tufts and MIT. I'm going to bet that's Marina Bears from Tufts.
Is she in that New York Times article that was today? That was published today?
If it was today, I didn't see it. I'm sorry. But I mean, she is often quoted. I know she was in a New York Times piece about a month ago.
Yeah, I'll find it. It was about early childhood and preparing kids for a digital age.
Yeah. What's interesting is, you know, Marina Bears was, the White House had an event, Early Learning STEM, and Marina was a speaker there. And one of the interesting perspectives Marina has on kids and coding is the languaging aspect of coding, which I agree is important for a number of reasons, not just for coding, but also for spatial understanding. And also, you know, you've probably seen, let me see, whose work is that? Kathy Hirsch-Pasek and Roberta Galinkoff, you know, the amount of words children under the age of 2 may hear and how that'll impact their reading abilities and success in life. You know, I think there's really something there about exposing younger kids to language, and a lot of it, not as background noise, but as conversational with parents and family members and so forth. Anyway, as you know, in the early months and early year or so of Wonder Workshop, Code.org got going and found out that parents were interested in seeing their children spend more time with computer science concepts in school if they could. This is a slide showing that, you know, Dash and Dot were released in 2014 and have done really great year over year in terms of sales, tripling their growth in the last over the last 2 years, and adoption into schools has grown nicely. There's a slide coming up here. I'm not sure if it's one or two up here about a robotics competition they just wrapped up in early 2017. Has some great stories behind it. Schools have been adopting Dash and Dot, and as you mentioned, it was released as a consumer product first. This is the case where I often say, who is it? Scott Osterweil coined the term accidentally educational. Scott Osterweil from, at the time, at Turk, when the Zoombinis game title was released, and teachers loved it. And that was a product meant for the consumer market, but teachers used it more so than consumers bought it.
I see Dash and Dot like for sale everywhere. Like it's at Target. I mean, like it seems like it's big time. I mean, you really.
Yeah, it is. It's in, Target and Best Buy and Barnes and Noble, and there are some relationships with some other school-based distributors. It's doing very well, and Wonder Workshop has become more formalized in the offerings for teachers. It's building curriculum, it's building professional development materials, it's building community and support online. And I think one of the things, I wasn't at ISTE this year, but I was at a recent CUE conference in California. And one of the interesting things about teachers who want to bring coding and technology into the classroom is a number of them would come up to me when I was at the booth, and they said, I don't know where to begin. And I'm like, well, let me bring you over to Blockly, this application that programs robots. And they're like, no, I can't do it. And it's like, well, yes, you can. They're just blocks. They're like building blocks or, wooden blocks. You need one after another, stack them and see how easy it is. And within usually about 30 seconds, teachers will often say, that's coding? You mean I did that? I can do this? I can do this. And so it's pretty empowering because the tools are very easy to get into and very easy to understand. I think part of the problem is there haven't been enough support materials for any robotics company that's trying to teach programming, not just Wonder Workshop. So we've really been focusing on making more helpful materials for classroom use for teachers for professional development. Let's see here. And for the last 2 years, Wonder Workshop has offered a robotics competition. This last year, it started, I think in the fall of 2016, and it wrapped up in January of 2017. And there were over 20,000 students from 57 different countries that participated in this robotics challenge using Dash and Dot. There were usually 4 students to a team. And one of the important aspects of Wonder Workshop from the very early days was to make a product that was gender neutral, that wasn't specifically skewed towards boys. And there's a wonderful story that Vikas told me before I had even known they were looking for someone for their VP of software. That when they were prototyping and they made a robot that had 4 wheels and they started doing kid testing, boys treated the robot like a truck, and girls weren't interested in playing with it. So then they made a robot with 2 wheels and brought it to kid testing, and boys played with it like it was a motorcycle, and girls weren't interested in it. And they had the bright idea of creating a robot that had 3 wheels, and boys didn't know what to make of it, but liked playing with it, and girls wanted to play with it as well. And I think kind of the key takeaway there is if you build something where kids can't project some other object onto it, you stand a good chance of being gender neutral, at least in terms of a tangible product.
Wow, that's hilarious.
I was so stunned when Vikas told me this story. I go that is the best, I think, for trying to create the balance. And what it says here is for the overall between boys and girls is, we had 44% girls participating in this competition. But if you broke it out by age, the 9 to 12 segment had I think it was 51% balance, which is, I think, for a robotics competition, pretty unheard of.
Is there a general age range that is the Dash and Dot are geared towards?
Yeah, so the product is sold for 6 to 12-year-olds, or you could say, first, kindergarten through 6th grade. It's a little harder on the younger ages from a pre-reader perspective. But that is currently, our sweet spot is in the, I'd say in the 8 to 12 space. Though
Okay.
we find that 6-year-olds do love it. Another key to the success of the product is it's loaded with personality. It has quirky little, vocalizations and sound effects that are quite endearing and charming. And a lot of kids see it. The strength of the personality is it's like its own little friend. And we get these photos sent in from parents of young children going to bed and hugging these robots, and they're not soft; they're hard.
Yeah. So it's appealing to the younger to younger kids in general.
It's very appealing. Yeah.
How
the personality in particular.
Out of curiosity, too, one of my students just asked if the Sphero and other codable robots have had an effect on the company in terms of market share or how you've chosen to market it and that sort of thing. Has there been a lot of competition? I see schools buying both, buying a big variety of these kinds of things if they can afford it.
It's a very good question, and it's also somewhat hard to answer because Sphero is a consumer play. Though they come out with their what I think it's called Sphero Spark right now is their educational offer. Ozobot also has great learning potential in it. Again, these are products that started in the consumer space. Another good one is like Osmo. Osmo is not a robot, but that was a consumer product first, but it's finding a lot of traction in the classroom. As it relates to robots, there are those companies and there are others, like Lego is a good example too, and they're coming out with Lego Boost that I think is available now. But one of the challenges we see amongst all these companies is how they support learning in the classroom. That typically, and I'm saying this typically about all consumer-based companies that want to make an educational play, is they really don't know the right questions to ask for creating product for educators. They make a lot of assumptions that tend to be incorrect. They tend not to bring in pedagogical or content experts. They are unfamiliar with what learning objectives are, whether in math or science or just in the coding space. And this is where we think that Wonder Workshop has a great leg up because we're bringing on educators, we're bringing on people that have developed curriculum, we're aligning to standards. Our content pool is very deep, where I think a lot of other consumer companies who have robots that want to play in the classroom space really aren't doing the due diligence they need, that they don't know what they don't know. And that's fine. Everybody has to start somewhere. So in terms of having market share eroded in the classroom, it's hard for me to say if that is happening in large numbers. I think it's always something we're aware of. But we were kind of first to market, and I think the strength of the educational content we offer is a real good competitive edge. However, something like a $69 Ozobot is pretty compelling for a teacher because it's $69. But they, there are pluses and minuses to each one of those. Even the lower priced ones. Let me share. I was in a demo with Vikas for App Camp, Warren Buckleitner's yearly event in Monterey, and Vikas, there was a podium in front of him. It was a little high, and he had a robot on top of it. It was like 4 feet off the ground, and he looked away for a second, and the robot slid off the podium and smashed onto the concrete floor, where everyone in the audience went, "Oh, they were concerned that the robot was ruined." And he just picked it right up, pressed the button, and away it went. Like, it's quite an indestructible robot, which goes a long way in in K-6 classrooms. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm rambling a bit here, I think. But are you still there? Just so I can't see you.
I'm here. I'm just muted. Yeah, no, this is
Okay.
interesting. And I'm passing. We're Google jockeying some of the things that you're mentioning so that we can look at it. And I'm putting Warren's site in the chat right now. But this is really interesting from a product standpoint, because I don't think enough teachers are.
Yeah.
I guess most teachers are not, unless they go looking for the information, are not going to know about the history and the mindset and the philosophy behind a company necessarily, unless they're really digging into it. So to me, this is interesting. I don't know about everybody else, but I like what you're talking about.
Yeah, great. Oh, let me see here. I just jumped out. And I see we have 10 minutes left, so I should probably step it up here. One of the interesting things since we launched is many countries are now making coding a requirement in classrooms. And, Dash and Dot were invited to a number of Hour of Code events and a couple of events at the White House. That this is, at least in the Obama administration, computer science is a priority. There's our products there, a better shot of it. It's won a number of different consumer awards. And just a couple of nights ago, the Cody Awards were in San Francisco, for SIIA. And we were nominated. Sadly, we didn't win. But we were very excited to be nominated. And out of all the awards that were being offered at the Cody Awards, we were the only robot and we were the only physical product that had been nominated.
And you didn't win? That's ridiculous.
The Cody Awards were announced last Wednesday, I think.
So who won? Who won for...
In our category?
Yeah.
Well, we submitted for Best Learning Platform, and Cengage won. And I actually think, Cengage has got it going on. So I thought they were really the toughest competitor in our category.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. If you say so.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at it from a numbers perspective too, as a business, and some of the acquisitions that they've made, I've been impressed with. But I have not been in the classroom with their products. So that's a different story. So let's see here. There's a small little screenshot there of the block-based code, kind of like Scratch, and our apps that we currently have out right now. We're making a lot of improvements to them. We're restructuring them in a number of different ways to benefit educators. We're hearing recommendations from them, and we're building them into our apps, which is great and a huge step forward, I think, from where we were 2 years ago, it being much more on the consumer side. Another interesting thing about Dash anyway, Dash has 5 motors in it. Most other robots have 2. There are many different sensors. I want to say it's 13 different sensors, but I might have the number wrong. But I know it's up there, where most other robots tend to have 1 or 2 sensors at most. Built-in microphones so we can detect where sound is coming from, where a user might be speaking. A lot of really great tech under the hood of these robots. And we also have a number of different accessories and attachments, and we're looking at doing other additional things in this space with some new announcements. This is the existing product line of what we have available. A lot of it, like you mentioned, we can find at Target, or you can order through Amazon, or a few other brick and mortar stores. And that's my Q&A slide here. So I got through the deck. It was just really short.
That's good. That's perfect.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
what's your actual title? It's a product development, or is
It's VP of software.
Okay. So what do you do?
But I think, what do I do? Oh, I lead a team of about, let's see, this week I was at 23 people.
Wow.
It's a mix of engineers, UX designers, UI designers, content developers, writers, and then I also meet and coordinate with the education team quite a bit, because education is something that I care about. I have access to the education team that's growing as well, so I bring in their they're content experts and they're curriculum experts, and I try to inform what we're shaping in my team.
And then they can tell you they can give you feedback and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
So
but
you're
at the same time, I'm not naive about it. Like I understand learning theories, but it's like I'm not the expert.
Yeah.
I know enough to say like, oh, let me grab
Yeah.
the right person to help me out here.
Wow. So you're developing. So tell us what's coming. What can you tell us that's coming down the pike?
So what has been announced at ISTE? We announced a challenge card pack where some teachers need some help in introducing programming into the classroom. So we have a series of cards. It's like an oversized deck of cards that are challenges that are leveled, to get you started. You could hand it out to a small group of children, 2 or 3 children, and say like, here, try this out. They're all made to be confined within a classroom period of time. And they get progressively harder. And there are cards with different programming aspects for one robot over another. And teachers are very excited about it. We're shipping them, I think it is in the beginning of October. And then we made some announcements, updates related to one of our apps called Wonder, where we leveled the content a little better as teachers were asking for. And we've made some Blockly releases with a number of teacher updates included. But you'll have to stay tuned for September for other announcements. And it is very exciting. Oh, I think you're muted.
That might help if I unmute. Does anybody want to grab the mic and ask him any questions? I would love to have some of my students ply Scott with some great questions here. Doug always has good questions. I know this is elementary for some of the people. We've got a lot of high school people in this group.
Oh, great.
But I think they need to know about this because some of the teachers here are getting this master's degree to bolster their knowledge in general with tech integration. Some want to be tech coaches, and I think this leads to a tech coaching endorsement. So I think it's important to kind of know the K-12 spectrum because you never know where you're going to land a little bit.
Oh, yeah. True. Very true. Yeah. And when I think, if you know child development, if you're making a product, be it education or other, for 3 to 6 year olds, there's a lot you need to know compared to a 9 to 12-year-old.
Yeah. Do you guys have any, speaking of older kids, do you guys have any plans to grow this age-wise? Or can you not say? I mean, I'm wondering if there's a teenager version of Dash and Dot that would be useful to the computer science curriculum somehow.
I'll have to let you know in September.
Oh, okay. Maybe I guessed. Because I think that, what's so interesting to me is that I taught middle school computer science when I was at U of C. And I was not a computer scientist by trade. I was a tech integrationist. And my colleagues got me up to speed with computational thinking. And it was like telling people, but nobody really got what we did. People wanted to get rid of our department. We had a pretty robust curriculum from second grade through high school. And we were really kind of getting our act together in terms of advocating for more of it in the school. And we pitched something to our head of school, and he said, you have to give people their dessert before their vegetables sometime, implying that it wasn't
the broccoli and
And that was 2007. So now 10 years later, coding's the big thing. And I think it's hilarious that all of a sudden it's taken the world by storm, because 10 years ago it was certainly, we were not the norm. And this stuff was going on. This is not new necessarily.
No,
a lot
it's
of new
not.
products that make it more interesting. But back then I taught Microworlds and Logo. Microworlds was a painting environment with Logo programming. Scratch. There was other things that were going on too, and my teaching partner used Runtime Revolution, which is now called something else, and they developed apps for kids at one point. I mean, there's a variety of ways you can do it. So I just think it's really interesting that all of a sudden people are gung ho about this.
Yeah, you know what? I wonder because I remember when I learned how to code, and when most people learn how to code, there's something magical about making something happen through code.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh wow, I created that. And I mean, there's an engagement hook there of empowerment. And I also think that once you start down that road of coding, there's a curiosity around what else can I do? And, I think if you can figure out how to make kids curious about something, that you've got them.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're going to learn. They don't need you. They just need that spark.
It's like critical thinking. It's teaching critical thinking in an authentic context. And
it is.
And adults, I was saying this in our previous hour, this really piggybacks on our previous speaker. Adults kind of freeze up, and they don't know how to do this. So I think like the best thing you could do in terms of professional development is just let teachers loose with this.
Yep.
So they experience that joy again, right?
I totally agree. I mean, this is in part why, I keep one foot in the consumer space, because I'm looking for that, things that you're unafraid of. You're not afraid of engaging with consumer products. Why should you be be afraid of engaging with something new in education? Sure, I understand the fear, but it's
there's a lot of it out there.
There is, and sadly, I think that keeps people from trying new things. It's that, and it's more about not having to be the expert in front of a classroom. It's being a facilitator, facilitating that curiosity and that spark.
Yeah.
I think that is often the missing ingredient and where the fear comes from.
Absolutely.
Scott, do you see any of your guys' coding going from block to just traditional coding? Because I know like the Bixby box that we were just looking at, they did it by traditional coding.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you guys see moving on for your products?
That's something we talk about a lot. I think block-based coding is a great place to start. It's one that ages down nicely. It's something where, sadly, what we've learned is, pre-readers sometimes have difficulty with block-based coding. And that's another thing we talk a lot about. But at the moment, we are largely block-based. We also do have for lack of a better way of describing it, it's like an icon-based way of pulling together assets to build state machines. Our app is called Wonder. It's a non-text way of building code in parallel processing ways that block-based coding or even text-based coding can't accommodate. It's a concept that's somewhat newer in computer science that many people don't know, but it's one that we're really strong about. But it's an excellent question. It's something that we're always looking at.
I didn't realize. Yeah, thanks for asking that, Karen. It was, so you may, I'll send you the recording for this, Scott, and you can take a look at Aidan Chopra. I don't know if you know him at all, but he used to work for Google. He's the co-founder of Bitsbox, and it's text-based coding on an online platform, and different coding cards are sent to the kids every month, and it's a consumer-based product. And they were on Shark Tank. So they're a little bit, they're not as far along as you guys are, but they're making progress. And they were on Shark Tank in the spring.
It's becoming a crowded area. I mean, a lot of people are racing in.
Yeah.
There are a lot.
Yeah. So it should be interesting to see what pans out. And I think it's also, the big takeaway for tonight for me has been consumer first, education second. Like you can perfect it and make some money. To sustain yourself on the consumer side, and then kind of start developing the education piece.
I don't want to. I don't want to say that. That was my experience. I'm not saying that's the experience for everyone. That that is the best. That is the takeaway of my talk. It's what worked for me, and I want to try to. I'm trying to find that quote from Marshall McLuhan, where he said, for anyone that thinks that there's a difference between education and entertainment, they don't know anything about either. I'm paraphrasing it, so I'm not getting it right, but I mean, I think
I'm looking for it right now. Anyone who tries to make a distinction between education and entertainment doesn't know the first thing about either. Yeah, I found it.
Because they really do overlap. in large ways, not in the ways that we think about it with commercial television or toy products, but there's a sensibility there and understanding how to entertain that goes a long way in education. So that, you know, that's not my message to your class. It just happens to be my experience and what I can share, what I've learned.
Well, I think it's interesting, and we don't often get kind of a backdoor view of what it's like to be in the startup space, and so I think we've had some lessons there.
That's a whole other period of time we could talk.
Yeah, so if I'm teaching a class in the fall, when you have these announcements happening, I'll make sure to see if you're available, because I'd love to have you come back and tell us about the latest development.
That'd be great.
I don't want to keep, Doug is hung in there with us, but I know that you have another meeting to go to too.
Yes.
So I don't want to keep you any longer, but thank you so much for doing this, Scott. And I'll
Thank
send you the
so much,
recording.
Wonderful. I look
it's
forward to
processed.
seeing it. Hope this was helpful. And certainly if any of your students have questions afterwards, I'd be happy to respond by email.
Okay. Sounds good. Have a good evening.
Great.
Thank you so much. I
too.
appreciate it.